like that intro music. It is quite the jazzy little tune. So once again, hello and welcome to another episode of The Collectors. I'm your host, Chad Starbuck, and I think I'm starting to get used to this hosting gig a little bit. I think what makes it easy on me is just the great guests that we have coming on the show. And our guest today is Tyler Newsome, and Tyler hails from Dallas, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. I think Tyler's probably been collecting pretty much his entire life. And he has a wide variety of items in his collection, anything from gas and oil to historical pottery. So let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with Tyler Newsome. All right, Tyler, hey, welcome to the show. I'm so very pleased to have you on The Collectors. Thanks for being a guest today.
Chad, thanks for having me.
You're right outside of Atlanta, right? In Dallas, Georgia?
Right outside of Atlanta, right in downtown Dallas, Georgia. So yeah, I got a little train horn going on.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I have heard that you have kind of have a new addition to your collection in your household. I think you had a new baby girl. Is that right?
That's right. 3 weeks old this Saturday. New baby girl. Her name's Collins, which is a family name. It's definitely one of the most interesting seasons of my life in the best way possible. I've told people within like an hour, you experienced every emotion available within just like an hour's time.
You certainly do.
So in a full day, you might experience that. And within an hour's time, you are happy, sad, everything all at once.
Well, congratulations on that. So I don't know, you might build on that collection someday, I would imagine.
we plan to.
Very cool. Well, again, thank you for being on the show today. And I kind of want to just jump right in. I kind of want to get a little background on yourself and kind of who influenced you as far as wanting to kind of jump into the collecting world?
Yeah, so at a really early age, my grandparents were definitely a big part of my life on both sides of the family.
Yeah.
Always spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and things that they enjoyed was antiquing, picking. Before the term picking was really coined.
Right.
That's what they were doing. You know, they were going to yard sales and estate sales and antique stores. And I loved attending those type of things with them, going to that type of stuff. I remember maybe at the age of 6 or 7, it's still fuzzy, but I went to an auction and was dead set on coming home with a Daffy Duck cookie jar. And I still have this thing, but of course I had no money to spend. But they put in the winning bid for me at an auction for this Daffy Duck cookie jar. I don't know if it was that. Went to a lot of car shows with my pawpaw. He had a 62 Impala that was just incredible. This is actually my car club jacket.
Cool.
Before he passed away, there was a ton of time spent with him at car shows and antique shops and at their house. He was like the ultimate collector. I mean, he had a basement full of gas pumps and signs and oil cans, and I just love the stuff. I remember I came home one day spending time with them. I came home to my house and just started, for whatever reason, displaying all the Hot Wheels I had as a kid on a shelf. And that's because that's what he was doing. He was displaying the type of thing he had. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was displaying a collection at just like a super young age. And that's what I've done since.
Well, that is a fantastic story. And you say you still have it? You still have the Daffy Duck cookie jar?
I have the Daffy Duck cookie jar. It's somewhere on a shelf at a house. It's one of those things. It doesn't necessarily fit my wife's decor. So it's one of the things that I have, but I don't know where I have it.
Yeah, that is a fantastic story. So like I said, you're outside of Atlanta, Georgia. You're in Dallas. And I would imagine that in that area, there is just quite a plethora of different places that you can go to kind of do your picking.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dallas, which is in Paulding County, here in Georgia, Dallas is like a Mayberry within one of the fastest growing counties in the nation.
Yeah.
Paulding County in general, I think 10 years ago or so was just absolutely exploded. Went from a very small farm community to, everywhere you look is subdivision and school popping up and shopping centers and just all kinds of stuff. But Dallas, where I'm at here in the downtown, has stayed like pure to the history that is so steeped in. So I walk a mile down the street to out of my house to the right, and there's a 150-year-old downtown with the buildings all still there.
Oh,
And
that's great.
is within them. And then I take a left and I'm walking to an older elementary school that's been there for 50, 60 years. I mean, it's a community where everywhere you turn, there's somewhere to look for something.
And I think from what I know of you, I mean, you're definitely into the history of your community as well, right?
Big time. Yeah, that's what I really like the most. And if there's something that I collect specifically, it would be local history for me, especially Dallas, Paulding County history.
That is great. So you said, you kind of said that your grandparents kind of gave you your start as far as into picking. How long now as an adult you kind of made this something that, interests you and you want to keep doing?
So when I got started, probably when I was still in high school, started up a bike shop, but not like not an everyday, go to Walmart and buy it. It was a vintage bike shop, only vintage parts, vintage bikes. And that shop is probably what continued to push me towards making this something more than just a small hobby.
Right.
Actually making some money from picking and antiquing, I guess you could say.
Yep.
So when I started in high school, the bike shop, I built it up, moved it downtown Atlanta to a place called Ponce City Market, which is right off the Beltline, where everyone likes to ride bikes in downtown Atlanta. And it got to be just a little much. It got to be something to where I was doing something that I loved doing, but I was making it kind of a full-time thing, and it kind of took the fun out of it.
Right.
For a while, as me and my wife got married and we bought our first house, which is a 150-year-old house, if in the way you would have it. For me, so probably the oldest antique I own, or one of them, is my house.
So here you go.
So we started to do that. I transitioned away from the bike shop in general, sold the shop to someone else who kind of kept the fire alive in that community and kept doing things with the shop that I had built. And then I decided to really focus more into preserving the local history here in the community. When I've always lived in downtown Dallas, or in Dallas, but when I moved to downtown Dallas and got the house, I decided, hey, I want to really be a part of this community and revitalizing some of the history. So my trajectory from kind of it being a business to now being more of a hobby. Now there are, plenty of, I'll never pass up a good deal.
Right. Sure.
Find and resell. That's what helps me keep the good stuff is, finding some things that necessarily aren't necessarily local history. It allows me to maybe spend some money here and there on keeping and preserving some local history. So going forward for me is collecting, and the trajectory, like you say, it all roots in kind of the community here in Dallas.
Well, that is really cool. I think it's really important that we all, help to preserve our local histories. There are fantastic items just outside our doors. And if we have somebody in our community that is helping preserve those for others that come after us, right? In that respect, when you are out there and you're looking for the items that are maybe associated with the Dallas community, kind of what's your process? Like if you're looking at an estate sale, or if you see an item that you're looking to go out and get, what's your process? What do you kind of do beforehand to get yourself ready?
Well, when I started, I wasn't so limited in what I was really looking for. When I started really looking for bicycles, signs, gas pumps, still look for that type of stuff to make money on.
Yep.
So I would go anywhere. My wife and I once drove to Kentucky and back in one day just to get a bike.
Oh,
it was a good enough deal from
how long was that?
Kentucky. Yeah, that's an 8-hour round trip, which I know there are some pickers out there that would like, that's nothing. But for us, like that was the moon, going to Kentucky and back.
Yeah.
In our early 20s, we go to Florida on vacation, but we hadn't drove to Kentucky and back in one day. So that was huge for us. But now, when I try to find this local history, it's not necessarily going to be in Kentucky. It could be, but most likely it's right here around me. So, thought process in finding and preserving local history is definitely estate sales. There are so many people who paved the way before me in this community that have a lot of the local history that needs to be saved, and a lot of their family just do not know kind of what their family members had.
Sure.
So to be able to come alongside that family and just say, hey, look, anything Dallas, Georgia that your family member has or had, we want to try to preserve that in any way possible. Anything Paulding County, really anything Georgia history in general. My business is Georgia Motor Oil, and it just comes from just the history and preserving anything really from Georgia. The things I like to keep, though, are going to be here in Dallas. So living in a kind of a small downtown like we do, historic downtown, every house on my street is almost 100 years old. So there's so much door knocking still to be done here in this community. You said, you try to think, what do you want to take on a pick like that? There's a little antique store here in town that it's really neat. It's called the Old Mill Antiques, and love going in there looking for stuff. I try to make a weekly trip, but I went by recently and saw a piece of pottery I thought was pretty neat, but I didn't take a flashlight with me. It's real dark in there. I didn't take a flashlight. Well, another guy sent me a picture. He said, hey, look what I found in the old mill. And he sent me a picture of it outside. And I'm like, man, that's a really good piece of pottery. He said, I saw it in there, but it was so dark, I really couldn't tell what it was. He said, you should have brought a flashlight with you. So that's something I would have done before. And I guess I slipped up. I guess I need to pack the flashlight with me, because you're really finding this stuff. It's tucked away. It's in attics. It's in basements, even in the dark booth at an antique store that everyone walks past.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, a lot of times you don't think of picking an antique store because, in a sense, that item has already been picked, right?
Yep.
But you never, I mean, sometimes antique stores are just jam-packed with stuff, and, the owner may not even know what they have in there. Yeah. So that's if you're around one, you might as well go in and check it out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit of kind of what you're sitting in front of today, if you would.
Yeah, so this is my shop back here behind me. Just about everything that I find or plan on reselling passes through this shop. It's not a big shop, but as you can tell, it kind of takes on the look of a country store. That helps kind of create, I guess, an environment for me to enjoy being in it and around it, the type of places I'm looking for. And it creates kind of a sense of when someone comes to me and buys something or is looking around, it creates a little sense of, I guess, nostalgia for them too, to pull a sign out of what looks to be a country store. So it's just a workshop, just my shop where I keep things, where I work on projects. But it's not all that old either. Some people ask me, man, this thing must be as old as your house. And I say, no, I built it just a couple of years ago. I love preserving that history, even if it means making a new structure like this look old. So I'll, always have people come and take pictures around the shop, and had a couple one time come and take prom pictures out in front of here. So it's fun to create that environment where people kind of like to be around and hang around.
Well, let's kind of transition a little bit, and let's kind of just jump into your collection a little bit, the different items that you collect. So obviously in front of your shop right there, you've got an old gas pump in front of there. And then, like you said, your moniker, where you're found on Instagram, is Georgia Motor Oil. Is that kind of where you started, was kind of with those, like the signs, like the gas and oil stuff?
Yeah, it still is kind of the bread and butter for me and what I'm looking for. That's what I connect with the most, with most people around, is that gas and oil related stuff. Still, like I said, got my car club jacket on. Still love that stuff totally. And there's such a good market for it. But sometimes as just a collector in general, and as a new dad, I have a hard time justifying keeping some of that stuff because the market's so hot for it right now.
Right.
I mean, there's some signs that I've found and have passed through my shop that are worth thousands. And I have a hard time kind of justifying keeping that, as some people would say, hey, this is a once in a lifetime find. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
for me, it's still got to be able to make this thing profitable in some ways, even though it's not my full-time job. It's still kind of something where me and my wife do on the side. Got to make it profitable in some ways. So gas and oil related stuff is still, when people think Georgia Motor Oil, I think they're still thinking of maybe the signs or the gas pumps or the trucks or motorcycles or bicycles or whatever that's passed through my hands, and still continue to sell and be a part of that. But as far as my collection and what I keep, I'm keeping more of the local history. And I tell you what, some of my favorite things are when the gas and oil world and local history
come together.
That's the best. That's absolutely the best, when I can find something like that.
Well, speaking of that, and kind of speaking of like the signs and stuff that have come through your hands, is there an item that kind of stands out that you came across, and you either found out that it was a local piece and it was very historical, or something maybe you sold for a bunch of money?
Yeah, both.
Both. Okay.
So there is a guy in our town runs a small auto parts store, and everyone knows this guy. He's the guy that's going to be your guy for anything for your four-wheeler or your hot rod or whatever. And his name's John. And when I was probably, 17 or 18, went over to his house to see his collection.
Yeah.
A bunch of gas and oil stuff. Of course, I'm trying to buy stuff as a 17 or 18-year-old, and I've got like $20 in my pocket. And he's, nicely telling me, no, this stuff's worth a little bit more. So he's giving me an education and showing me a lot of really good local history. And he lives here in downtown Dallas. So he's kind of showing me these things. And all of a sudden he takes me to this room in his barn. And on the wall is a sign that says Moss Chevrolet and Wrecker Service, and in Warren's Paints. So these three things: Chevrolet dealership, a Wrecker Service, and a paint dealer, Dallas, Georgia. It's hand painted 4x8 sign. And it's stuck in my brain as a teenager, trying to figure out how in the world I can get this thing. Well, I had no way of buying it, and it was something he treasured. So something I remembered. And then fast forward to a few years ago when we moved here in town, not too far from him. He knew I bought the house, walked down and talked to him. I said, "Hey, I need you to sell me that sign. I want to put it in my dining room." Where I live is just a couple blocks down from where this Moss Chevrolet dealership was in the 50s.
Right.
He says, "Well, throw me a price out." And I throw him a price out, and blows my mind. He actually takes it. And I'm able to buy this Moss Chevrolet sign, put it in the dining room. My wife is totally okay with it, which is awesome. She saw how good. I don't think anyone could. There's something about an old hand-painted sign with the perfect on it. It looks like art. So it's in the dining room. It's got the Chevrolet gas and oil connection. It's got the Dallas, Georgia local history connection. My grave will have to be 4x8 because that's how big that sign
going with you.
It's going with me.
Well, that is another great story, and just the fact that it's right there from the community that you're in, even makes it better. Maybe when you're old, somebody will come to you and say,
"Pass it along.
Can I pass? Yeah, can you pass it along?"
Pass it along. Yeah.
A very cool. Now, some of the other things that I know that you're into, you mentioned a little bit, is the pottery.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit of the story there, because I think that it has to do, like there was a factory that was in town.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so crazy to be in gas and oil and love hot rods and cars and motorcycles and things that, are, I guess you could say, a little bit more on the lines of something that's indestructible. You love that rough and tough stuff, but then to also love something can be as fragile as stoneware or pottery.
Right.
It's funny how that mixes. Usually those crowds of collectors don't necessarily mix. The guys that are collecting old jugs and pottery aren't necessarily the guys that are also collecting cars and gas pumps and signs.
Right.
It's not anything that I would be interested in if it wasn't for the local history behind it. In the northern part of the county in North Paulding, it's still a very rural farm area up there. was what some have called a jug factory, or an earthenware factory. But it was basically an old mill that also, along with being a sawmill and a tanyard, also made pottery. So
Okay.
first found out about this particular establishment up in the northern part of the county was just by other collectors who said, oh, you love local history. You should find some of that old Sly's Mill pottery. That's what the place was called. It was called Sly's Mill. Had no idea what the stuff looked like, didn't know anything about the old mill, but I had to really go from picker to researcher. So I had to ask the locals, do you have any of this stuff? Have you heard of this place? And just a couple years of just a ton of research before I could actually start to understand what the pottery made at this place looked like. So just to set kind of the scene, they were in business from 1860 to 1930. So during the
Wow.
Civil War
Yeah.
to the 1930s. So that's a long time. And a little ad in the Atlanta Journal Constitution that was found by Ancestry.com and looking into things that way, said that in 1882, I believe it was, they made 1,500 gallons of pottery there per week with only 4 employees. So imagine,
Wow.
that's either 1,500 1-gallon jugs, or that could be 750 2-gallon jugs. I don't know exactly how it worked out, but that's still a lot of pottery either way. With the amount of pottery being made there, that stuff still has to be around somewhere. It's got to be in barns and attics and at estate sales. So I really started trying to find this stuff and figure out what it looked like, and was able to eventually kind of get a knack for how to identify this stuff and to determine whether it came from this Sly's Mill here in the county.
Does the pottery, I'm gonna imagine, has markings on it of some sort?
It, as crazy as it is, it doesn't have really any signatures or markings, no stamps, no anything. They were making stuff purely for utilitarian purposes. So just like you would go buy maybe a bowl or anything that you would get at the grocery store to use, generally your tea pitcher doesn't necessarily stamped on it, say where
Sure.
it's, maybe it does, but it's the same thing applies back then. So really had to look into the techniques and how they were made, some of the glazes they used on the pottery, what the clay looked like, to be able to tell if it came from there. A lot of this stuff too was passed down by generation and generation.
Right.
Community. So that's a good way of telling too. But unless it was signed by the potter for some reason that they felt that piece was special, generally the pieces that were signed were not just sold. It was something that the family of the potter probably would have kept. So still super tough to identify this stuff because, like you said, it's not signed or marked. But once you get the eye for what the stuff looked like they were making up there, you can spot it from a mile away.
So, like, obviously you have some of these pieces now.
I do.
Right. And
Yeah.
like, so how many have you been able to find and collect?
Well, I've got about 30 or 40 pieces that I want to keep for myself.
Yep.
That I want to keep to pass on to my family, to have here at the house, to just have part of local history. I've probably found maybe 50 or so pieces, maybe about 10, 20 pieces I've passed on to other collectors here in the community. So I really do have probably as many as anyone's been able to find here locally. But that's only because of the work of other pickers before me, other guys who have been able to really help me understand and determine what this stuff looked like. Because before, maybe up to 20 years ago, there was no one that even knew about this place, really. It was forgotten history among family, forgotten history among the community. So it's been fun really revitalizing this really big industry, 1,500 gallons of pottery per week in the 1880s. I mean, big establishment, and it's just been lost to time.
Now, do you have these like pieces displayed in your house and such? You have a nice spot?
Yeah, I do. I've got a few pieces. I can't I can't hang on to all of them because some 5-gallon churns and, big pieces of pottery, and my office is only so big. So like I said, I will let some others in the community have some when I find them. I really want, family and other locals to really have this stuff if they're looking for it. But lucky enough, there's, here's a piece here. It's not all that big. Maybe this is a half-gallon size pitcher.
Yep.
But what's cool about this particular piece is it's signed by the potter, John Terry, and is dated April 8th, 1887.
Oh, wow.
2 years before this guy, John Terry, died. So a really cool piece. This one was actually found by a guy who bought it at an auction. He bought it thinking it was made somewhere in Alabama. But some of the research and techniques that I've been able to come up with and researching the potters here in the community, it was easy to tell. John Terry, he was a guy here in Paulding. And this particular piece here, it's totally signature and significant. It's totally what this stuff looked like here in the county.
Right. And was most of the stuff primarily like tableware?
Anything from pitchers to jugs to churns, kind of the utilitarian farm stuff. And here in the South, especially in Atlanta and in and around Georgia, during Prohibition era, the moonshiners really, this is where they were buying their jugs to obviously put their moonshine in. So it kind of there's a little bit of a cross into kind of the car world there. All the guys that love the early 20s, 30s cars, they love the history around moonshining. And these guys here at this factory were generally supplying jugs to the moonshiners. So not as much, never seen a plate, never really seen a cup. Okay. That type of china, I guess you could say, is a little bit of a different category. This stuff that was made there was supplying the local farmers, the local moonshiners, some of the local general stores. When I say churn, that's to churn butter.
Yeah.
To churn, cream and milk into butter. So a lot of kind of farming industry type stuff is what they were making.
Well, that is really cool. And I think it's really cool that you're kind of preserving that piece of the local history as well. So kudos to you on that. Are there any other items that you're kind of niched into right now that, you really like to go out and you're looking for?
Yeah. So if you're a bottle collector, 90% of the time finding bottles is from literally going out in the woods and finding actual bottles. A lot of bottle collectors love to find their stuff from, going to where bottles have been dumped in the past or they've been trashed.
Yep.
So here in the community, I love to look for where bottles have been dumped because there was a big bottle works, a bottle factory here. It was called Dallas Bottle Works. It was also known as Spink's Bottle Works. And they bottled several different I would assume drinks and sodas back then. And I love to find anything Dallas, of course, but especially Dallas bottles. And these are glass bottles we're talking, not as much pottery. Glass bottles actually kind of help tell the story how some of that early pottery was phased out because glass and metal and tin was used a lot more. So for me, I'm not much of a bottle collector, but I love the local history around the bottles here in town. The Bottle Works, the building is still there. I went in, asked the owner, hey, has there been any bottles you found? You own this building. She runs a business out of there. Have you found any bottles here in the old Bottle Works? She said, I've looked this place over and I have not found any bottles here. The people who are finding them are digging them up around town. So just by word of mouth and by door knocking, there's a couple bottles that I've actually been able to find and surface here in town that actually say Dallas on them. Here's a good example of one. As you can see, the top's broken off of it.
Yep.
It's so hard to come across a bottle that was made here in town. And right here at the bottom, it says Dallas, Georgia.
Oh, cool.
Of them that I have actually are complete. They say Dallas Bottle Works or Spink's Bottle Works, Dallas, Georgia. Those are really neat to find. It's something I look for because, again, it's part of that saving local history.
Well, that again, that's really cool, and I think it's it's one thing. I think there's a lot of collectors out there that are just they're collecting something because it's it excites them. They want to collect on it, but they don't necessarily know the history behind it, or
Right.
the historical part of it is not why they do it. So I think for you of having that historical perspective on the different items that you're collecting right now.
Yeah.
Is a really cool thing, and it's another facet of the collecting world.
Right.
So that is really cool. Jumped into obviously the Instagram and the Facebook world.
Yeah.
Is that where people can find you and find your items now?
Yeah. Instagram is huge. When I had the bike shop, for whatever reason, early on, the Instagram page I created absolutely exploded. And just waking up and looking, and by the use of some of the marketing tools that I looked into, really created a big following of the bikes I was finding, and a lot of those followers have been along for the transition just into the different, all picking, all antiques, all vintage collecting, but just kind of different things. A lot of the followers have followed along. So I generally post everything that I find, or stories on particular items, and even things that are for sale, on my Instagram, Georgia Motor Oil. It's definitely been a great tool for me. I don't have a website necessarily, but I love the community that has been around social media and through Instagram.
Yep. Now, are most of the items that you're posting on there, are the items mostly for sale, or are you just pretty much showing off your collection?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
There will be, if there's something for sale, I'll make it known that it's for sale. If there's just something in my collection that I'm showing, I'll make it known that it's just something that I'm just showing off.
Is there any other places that people can find you?
Well, Instagram is always going to be the best place to communicate with other collectors, to reach out for things that are for sale, or things that I'm, telling a story about a particular item. But for me too, along with some of the local history, speaking of the pottery that was up in the pottery factory that was up in North Paulding, a lot of people want to know more about that. So earlier this year, I put together a book that just
nice.
Before. There was just, like I said, it was so hard to come up with the information on the pottery and the stoneware that was made here in Paulding County. It's such a significant part of Georgia's history. It's actually in Atlanta's History Center, some examples of this pottery, but there's just so little knowledge and information out there. So myself and several other local collectors put together this book earlier this year, and that's something that you can find on eBay. The book's called Paulding County Clay, and it talks a lot about just the local history here in town, all the way through up till the 1930s. Again, the pottery here was made from the 1860s up to the 1930s. So a really wide range of histories in that book, Paulding County Clay, and that can be found on eBay.
Well, that is really cool. Taking your collecting aspect and putting things together in a book. So we'll make sure people can find that. Now, you've also been highlighted in a couple other places as well, right? Like some magazines, I think.
Yeah, early on in the with the bike shop, there was a couple magazines that took notice and had a really great time kind of sharing what I do with them. One was Peloton magazine, which is still a really big magazine. Peloton's a great company in the cycling world. So that was really fun to kind of be highlighted, and highlight Peloton magazines generally highlights newer bikes and equipment.
Yeah.
So to bring kind of the vintage bicycle world and just vintage collecting and picking in general into that magazine was really neat. And then Kickstand magazine is more centered around the culture, around collecting and riding and being around vintage bicycles. So that was really great to be a part of back then. And then really now, just talking about the local history, this is really one of the first outlets I've been able to share with you about some of the interesting local history here in Georgia, specifically in Paulding and Dallas here.
Well, I'm glad we can certainly tell that story. I think it's, like I said, it's really important that people kind of understand what it is that they're collecting, but also allows you to be able to tell that story to a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think every time, no matter what collector I'm talking to, no matter where they're from or what part of the country, when they find an item that's from their hometown, I think that it sits different with them, as it does me. I think everyone has a little bit of explorer of local history in them, and I hope that my passion and history for my local history comes across and kind of sparks that in other collectors too.
Well, again, like I said, I think you've got a great story, and it's been a pleasure having you on this show today. And keep collecting.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of The Collectors is in the can. I want to thank Tyler Newsome, better known on Instagram as Georgia Motor Oil, for being our guest on the show today. And I certainly want to thank you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And if you like the show, be sure and hit that like button, share it out with your friends and family, and then be sure and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And then join us next time on The Collectors as we get to experience another unique and exciting collection and collector. Take care and keep collecting.